Daniel Reyes had driven to the cemetery in Marietta 40 or 50 times over 7 years and had never once gotten out of the car. He would park on the access road that ran along Section H, where the markers stood in their white rows under the oaks. And he would sit with the engine off and look at the section, without looking at any single stone in it. And after a while he would start the engine again and drive home. Scout rode with him every time, in the back seat, watching the cemetery through the window with the patient attention of a dog who understood that this place meant something to the man he belonged to, and that the meaning had a weight that kept the man in the car. Scout was a 7-year-old German Shepherd, retired now, gray coming into the black of his muzzle. He had served downrange, actually served, 3 deployments. A working dog with a record and a row of the small recognitions that working dogs accumulate. And he had come home to Daniel because Daniel was one of the men Scout had worked beside. And when Scout's service ended, the arrangement that let a handler's squad mate adopt him had landed the dog in the one house where his presence did the most good. They had been together 5 years. They had been in the same places, in the same war, under the same man. The same man was in Section H. It was a Saturday in April when Daniel saw the boy. He had parked in the usual spot and was doing the usual thing, sitting, not looking, the engine ticking as it cooled, when a kid on a bicycle came up the cemetery road. 11, maybe 12. He rode with the loose competence of a boy who had ridden this route many times, and he had a bundle of flowers across the handlebars, wrapped in the paper from a grocery store floral department, and he turned off the road into Section H and laid the bike down in the grass and walked to a stone 4 rows in and crouched in front of it. Scout stood up in the back seat. The boy was talking. Daniel could not hear the words through the glass, but he could see the shape of it, a kid crouched in front of a grave, replacing old flowers with new ones. And talking, the unhurried way you talk to someone you know well, someone you are catching up with. The stone was 4 rows in. Daniel did not have to count which one it was. He had spent 7 years not looking at it from exactly this distance. He knew which one it was. What Daniel Reyes finally did that Saturday, after 7 years of sitting in a car at the edge of a cemetery, and what he learned about the boy who had been coming to that grave every week since he was 4 years old, would not undo the 7 years. But it would end them, and it would give 2 people who had each been carrying the same man, in their own separate ways, the thing neither of them had known how to find alone. If this is the kind of story that stays with you, subscribe. This one is about what it takes to finally get out of the car. You'll want to be here for what the boy says. Daniel had enlisted at 19 and served 11 years and come home at 30 with a part of himself that had been left in a valley in Afghanistan, which was a part he had never fully recovered and had stopped expecting to. He was 38 now. He did logistics consulting for a freight company in Atlanta, work that was steady and unremarkable, and asked nothing of him that he could not give, which was the kind of work he had needed. He lived alone with Scout in a house in Smyrna and had built a life that functioned, that was in most visible respects a good life, and that had a single locked room in it that he did not go into. The locked room was Michael. Staff Sergeant Michael Brennan had been Daniel's squad leader. He had been 29 years old, from Marietta, Georgia, married. With a younger brother and a 4-year-old nephew, he talked about the way men downrange talked about the people who were the reason they intended to come home. He had been the best of them. Not in the way that gets said about the dead as a courtesy, but actually, demonstrably, the man whose judgment you trusted ahead of your own, and whose steadiness held a squad together in the moments when steadiness was the only thing between the squad and catastrophe. There had been such a moment. Daniel did not narrate it, even to himself, in detail. It lived in the locked room and he kept the door closed, but the shape of it was this: an ambush, a kill zone, 3 men who should not have made it out, and Michael Brennan making a decision in the space of a few seconds that traded his own life for theirs. He had done it the way he did everything, without hesitation and without drama, and the 3 men had lived, and Daniel was one of the 3. That was the thing in the locked room. Not the grief exactly, though there was grief. The thing in the locked room was the arithmetic. Daniel was alive because Michael was not. Daniel had a life, the house, the dog, the steady work, the functioning days, and every piece of that life was something Michael had paid for and would never have. Daniel had not been able to look at the grave, because looking at the grave meant standing in front of the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was unbearable, and he had decided, without ever quite deciding it, that the way to survive being alive was to not look directly at the cost. He had carried Michael's photograph in his wallet for 7 years. He had sent a card to Michael's family the first Christmas and had not been able to do it again, because the card felt like a lie, like a man pretending to be okay enough to send a card when he could not get out of a car. He had told himself he would visit the family when he was ready, and ready had not come. And the years had gone by, and the not visiting had become its own weight, stacked on top of the original one. Scout had been the one good thing that came directly from Michael's world. Scout had known Michael, had worked beside him, had been in the same valley, and on the nights when the locked room leaked, when the arithmetic got loud, Daniel would put his hand on Scout's head, and the dog would lean into him with his full weight. And it was the closest thing to absolution Daniel had found. Because Scout had been there, and Scout did not hold it against him that he was alive. Eli Brennan had been 4 years old when his uncle died. He did not remember Michael well, he had been too young, but he remembered some things, the way small children remember a few bright fragments of a person who mattered. He remembered being lifted up very high. He remembered a laugh that was bigger than other people's laughs. He remembered that his uncle had called him Captain, for reasons no one had ever explained to him and that he had never asked about, because he liked it too much to risk it turning out to be ordinary. Eli was 11 now. He lived with his parents, Michael's younger brother Sean and Sean's wife Carol, in the same Marietta neighborhood the Brennans had always lived in. 4 blocks from the cemetery. He had started leaving flowers at his uncle's grave when he was 7, which was the age at which his parents had judged him old enough to ride his bike to the cemetery and back on his own, on the quiet residential streets, on Saturday mornings. He had asked to do it. That was the part that had undone his mother the first time. He had not been assigned the task or guilted into it. He had asked at 7 years old whether he could be the one to bring Uncle Mike flowers, and his parents had said yes, and had assumed it would last a few weeks the way most things a 7-year-old is enthusiastic about last a few weeks. It had lasted 4 years. Every Saturday. Flowers from the grocery store, bought with his own allowance, which his parents had quietly started supplementing when they realized he was spending nearly all of it on flowers. He rode to the cemetery, replaced the old flowers, and stayed for a while. His parents had not known, for a long time, that he talked. They found out the way you find out things about your children, accidentally. Carol had come to the cemetery one Saturday to bring Eli a forgotten water bottle and had hung back at the edge of Section H and watched her son crouched in front of his uncle's grave, talking, gesturing sometimes, the unmistakable body language of a boy telling someone about his week. She had not interrupted. She had gone back to her car and sat in it and cried, which was a thing the cemetery produced in the adults of this family with some regularity, and then she had driven home and not told Eli she had seen. Because some things a child does are between the child and the person they are doing them for. Eli talked to his uncle because, in his understanding of the situation, The understanding of a boy who had been 4 when it happened and had assembled his sense of it from fragments and overheard adult conversations and the particular logic of children. His uncle was somewhere and could probably hear and would want to know how things were going. He told Michael about school, about baseball, which he was good at, and which he suspected his uncle would have wanted to hear about specifically. About his parents, about the dog he wanted and was not allowed to have yet. He told his uncle the ordinary news of an ordinary boy's life, every Saturday, for the simplest and most devastating reason a child ever has for doing anything. He did not want his uncle to be alone. What's the most faithful thing you've ever seen a child do? Something they kept up far longer than anyone expected, for reasons that were entirely their own. Tell me about it in the comments. Kids understand some things more clearly than we do. This section is for those. Scout was out of the car before Daniel had fully decided to open the door. That was not how it usually went. Usually Daniel controlled the door, and Scout waited. But Daniel had cracked it. Some part of him, watching the boy, had reached for the handle without consulting the rest of him, and Scout had read the crack as a decision and pushed through it, and was out on the cemetery grass and was walking, not fast, toward Section H. Daniel had to follow. There was no version where he let his dog walk up to a strange child alone in a cemetery. So the thing he had not been able to do for 7 years he did in the end almost by accident. Pulled across the grass in the wake of a German shepherd who had decided the waiting was over. The boy looked up when Scout approached. He was not afraid. He was a boy who wanted a dog, and a dog was approaching, and his face did the thing a dog-wanting boy's face does. Scout walked up to him and sat down in front of the grave, beside the fresh flowers, and looked at the boy, and then looked at the stone, and then lay down in the grass in front of it with his chin on his paws, in the specific way he had lain down in front of things that mattered for the whole of his life. "Is he yours?" the boy asked Daniel, who had come up behind. "Yeah," Daniel said. His voice did not work quite right. "His name's Scout. He's a good dog," the boy said, with the certainty of a child who knew. He put his hand on Scout's head. Scout allowed it, leaned into it, the way he leaned into Daniel on the hard nights. Daniel looked at the stone for the first time in 7 years from less than 4 feet away. Michael J. Brennan, SSG, U.S. Army, 1983-2012, beloved. He had known every word of it. He had still not been prepared to read it. "Did you know him?" the boy asked. He had seen Daniel's face. Children see faces. "Yeah," Daniel said. "I knew him." The boy stood up. He was looking at Daniel with a new and total attention. "You knew Uncle Mike?" And Daniel Reyes, standing in front of the grave of the man who had died so that he could be standing anywhere at all, looked at the 11-year-old nephew that Michael Brennan had talked about in a valley on the other side of the world. The boy Michael had called Captain, the 4-year-old who had become the keeper of a grave, and said the truest and hardest thing he had. He was my squad leader. He saved my life. A breath. I'm one of the men he saved. The boy's eyes went very wide. They sat in the grass for a long time, the 3 of them, Daniel and the boy and Scout between them, in front of the stone. Eli had 100 questions, and asked them in the order an 11-year-old asks them, which was not chronological or logical, but emotional, the most important ones first. Was Uncle Mike brave? Yes, the bravest man Daniel had known. Did it hurt? Daniel told him the truth that was also a kindness. It was fast, and Mike was thinking about the men he was saving, not about himself. Did Uncle Mike talk about him? And here Daniel's voice failed entirely for a moment, because the answer was yes, constantly. and he had not known until this moment that he would be able to give the boy that. "He called you Captain," Daniel said. Eli went still. "He told us about that," Daniel said. "About his nephew Eli, who he called Captain. He said you were the reason he was going to make it home. He talked about you all the time. He showed us a picture. You were little. You had a baseball glove that was too big for your hand." Daniel's throat worked. Every guy in that squad knew who Captain was. He made sure we knew. Eli Brennan, 11 years old, who had been 4 when his uncle died, and had spent 7 years bringing flowers to a stone so the man under it would not be alone, put his face down against Scout's neck, and cried the way children cry when something they had hoped was true turns out to be true. When he could talk again, he said the thing that Daniel would carry for the rest of his life, the thing that finally opened the locked room not by force, but by showing Daniel that the door had never needed to be locked at all. "I didn't want him to think nobody remembered," Eli said. "So I came every week. So he'd always have somebody." Daniel looked at the stone. 7 years he had stayed in the car because he could not stand in front of the arithmetic. Alive because Michael was dead. A life built on a debt that could never be paid. And the whole time, 4 blocks away, a child had been doing the simplest version of the only thing that had ever actually been required, showing up so the man would not be alone, so he would always have somebody. Eli had not been paralyzed by the arithmetic, because Eli had never done the arithmetic. He had done something truer than arithmetic. He had just kept coming. He had somebody, Daniel said. His voice was wrecked and he did not care. He had you. You did that. For 7 years you did that. And it mattered. And I should have been here. And I wasn't. And you were. You're here now, Eli said. He said it the way children say the things that take adults decades to learn. Simply, as though it were obvious, as though the 7 years did not need to be litigated, because the only thing that mattered was the present fact of a man sitting in the grass in front of the grave. You're here now, he said again. And that was the end of the 7 years. Eli's parents needed to be part of this, and Daniel knew it, and the rightness of doing it correctly was something Michael himself would have insisted on. So before anything else, before the afternoon went any further, Daniel asked Eli for his parents' number, and Eli, who had been raised well, said his mom was probably home and that Daniel should talk to her, and used Daniel's phone to call her himself, so that the first thing Carol Brennan heard was her son's voice telling her that one of the men Uncle Mike saved was at the cemetery, and could she come? Carol came. Sean came 20 minutes after her, leaving work. And the introduction that Daniel had been unable to make for 7 years, the visit to the family that he had told himself he would do when he was ready, happened in the grass of Section H, with the man it was about 4 rows in, and a German shepherd who had known him lying in front of his stone. It was not the polished, prepared visit Daniel had imagined and failed to make. It was better than that, because it was real and unplanned, and because Eli was there. And Eli's presence made it impossible for it to be formal. Carol cried, and then stopped, and then started again. Sean, who had his brother's steadiness, Daniel saw it immediately, the same way of being solid in a hard moment, shook Daniel's hand and held it, and said the thing that brothers of the dead say to the men their brothers saved. Which is some version of "I'm glad it wasn't for nothing," except Sean said it better than that, Sean said. He'd be glad you made it. That's all he'd care about. That you made it. And Daniel, who had spent 7 years believing that his survival was a debt, heard for the first time the thing that the locked room had kept him from hearing, that to the people who loved Michael, Daniel's survival was not the debt. It was the point. It was the thing Michael had bought, and they were glad he had bought it, and they did not want Daniel to spend his life unable to enjoy the thing their brother had died to give him. Scout went to Sean and to Carol, each in turn, and let them put their hands on him. This dog, who had been in the same war as the man they had lost, and the contact seemed to mean something to all of them that did not require words. Daniel started coming to the cemetery on Saturdays, not instead of Eli. With him, the boy kept bringing the flowers. That was his. It had been his for 7 years, and Daniel would not have taken it from him for anything. But now there were 2 of them, and a dog, and the Saturday visit became a different kind of thing than either the boy's solitary vigil or the man's paralyzed driving past had been. They talked to the stone together. Daniel told Eli stories about Michael, the real ones, the ones that made Michael a person and not just a hero. The time he'd gotten the whole squad addicted to a terrible card game. The way he sang badly and constantly and did not care. The letters he wrote home that he read aloud first to make sure they were good enough. Eli wrote some of them down. He had started a notebook, things about Uncle Mike, and Daniel filled pages of it, and Eli's parents read it, and Michael Brennan became, in his nephew's notebook, more present in death than a 4-year-old's fragments could ever have kept him. Sean and Carol had Daniel to dinner. Then again. Then it became a standing thing, the first Sunday of the month. And Daniel, who had built a functioning life with a locked room in the middle of it, found that the room was not locked anymore, and that what was in it was not only the arithmetic, the unbearable cost. What was in it was also Michael. The whole of Michael. The friend. The leader. The man who sang badly and called his nephew captain, who was allowed now to be remembered as a person Daniel had loved rather than only as a debt Daniel could not pay. Eli got his dog that fall. Sean and Carol had decided it was time, and they had asked Daniel's advice, and Daniel had helped them find a young shepherd mix from a rescue, and Eli named him Mike, which made everyone laugh, and then made everyone quiet, and then made everyone glad. Because it was exactly the right amount of irreverent, and exactly the right amount of true, and it was the kind of thing the original Mike would have found hilarious. Scout, getting old now, took the young dog under his supervision with the patient authority of a senior enso breaking in a recruit, which everyone agreed was thematically perfect. There are debts that cannot be paid, and the trying to pay them can take a man's whole life, can keep him in a car at the edge of a cemetery for 7 years, staring at a cost he cannot bear to approach. And there are children who do not know yet that some debts cannot be paid, and so they do not try to pay them. They simply do the small faithful thing, the bringing of flowers, the telling of the week's news, the showing up, so that the person they love will not be alone. And it turns out the children are right and the men are wrong. The grave never needed the debt paid. The grave needed somebody to come. A boy had been coming for 7 years. The day a Marine finally came to and found the boy, and learned what the boy had understood all along, that you do not visit the dead to settle accounts, you visit them so they are not alone, and so that you are not either, was the day both their lives changed, not because the loss was undone, because the loss stopped being a thing each of them carried alone, and became a thing they carried together in the grass of Section H on Saturday mornings, with flowers and a notebook and 2 dogs and the steady ongoing presence of a man neither of them would stop remembering. Daniel got out of the car. It took him 7 years. A boy on a bicycle showed him it was possible. And in the end, the bravest thing he ever did was not in the valley where Michael saved him. It was 4 feet of cemetery grass he had not been able to cross, and a Saturday in April when he finally did. This story is for everyone carrying a loss they cannot approach, who drives past the cemetery, who cannot open the box of photographs, who has built a functioning life with a locked room in the middle of it. You do not have to pay the debt. The people you lost did not want you to pay a debt. They wanted you to live and to remember them, and those two things were never supposed to be at war. Someone may be waiting to carry it with you. Sometimes it's a child who already figured out the thing you've been unable to learn. And if you know a kid like Eli, who does a faithful thing, quietly, for reasons of their own, tell them it matters. It matters more than they know. Do you have someone whose grave you haven't been able to visit, or a loss you haven't been able to approach? You don't have to explain it. Just know you're not the only one sitting in the car. And if a child in your life has ever taught you something about grief or faithfulness that the adults couldn't, tell me about it in the comments. This section is for them. If this channel is one you want to stay with, subscribe. Every story here is for the people trying to cross 4 feet of grass. There are more of them. You will want to be here for the next one. What will you carry from this one? Eli talking to the grave so his uncle wouldn't be alone, or Daniel finally getting out of the car? Tell me in the comments. I'll see you there.